Good day, friends. We are here again for another session, but this time our workshop coming out of our conference, Reset Conference, that was held on the 25th of September, a few weeks ago. This is our workshop. In other words, this is where now the rubber meets the road. We have done the talking, the theoretical description of where we are, what we ought to be, but how do we do that? So we have done the what and maybe the why, but how now do we do this? Today, I am not proving to have all the answers. In fact, I probably have more questions than answers, but I'm here just to facilitate our thinking, facilitate our working out of what we could be doing or should be doing and want to be doing. So I'm just teasing our brain today. And when you get a chance to think this through as a group, to talk together, then we can come up with even more solutions as we reset instead of remaining the way we are. So just to remind us quickly as to the things that I said on the 25th. There are 5 things I said, and I used the word reset to help us. I said, reduce the non-essentials in our church. I said, emphasize the main things of the church. I said, seize the new things that God is doing around our church. I also said, expect small and slow changes as we reset. And finally, I said, think through where we are. In other words, evaluate. Now, out of this came some questions. For example, in my mind, I'm asking myself the question, how might we put more resources in our people? Because we recognize, coming out of the fact that we should reduce the non-essentials of our church, that the building, we have been focusing a lot on the building over people. And so I've thought this through, and one of the things I've said is we need to put more energy in empowering believers for life alone. Now, originally we used to think of the shut-ins of having this life alone, and we didn't give much thought to how we might help the shut-ins, the sick and shut-in among us as believers. But now the coronavirus has forced us indoors, and we now have to empathize. We can now, in solidarity, understand what those who have been shut in are going through. So how might we empower believers for life alone? In Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, we're told that because of the persecution, that great persecution that broke out, the believers were scattered all over Judea and Samaria except the apostles. That's what the text says. Meaning that the believers had to find a way to do life alone. In fact, the text goes on to say that they preached the word, and there was great spreading of the gospel all over Judea and Samaria, fulfilling what Jesus says in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, that you shall be my witnesses, not just in Jerusalem, but Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And so we have to empower our people so that when we come to a situation where we're living life alone, we're able to do so. So I'm asking us, how might we put more resources in our people? And we have to think through that question. Another thing that comes to mind with this is small groups. We have to now put small groups at the forefront. We have to now put a lot of emphasis on encouraging small groups, people with people, so that we might develop and grow together. Another question we have to consider is, what is the bare minimum we need when all is stripped away? Like I said in my presentation, that as we meet on Zoom, we recognize that we cannot sing as we are used to singing in church. We recognize that there are some things we can't do as we would normally do them in church. In fact, our time has been truncated. And so we have to do things in a specific time frame. And so when all of this is stripped away, I recognize that with most of our meetings, what is happening is that the word is the thing that takes center stage. The word, even over singing. So we have to spend more time focusing on the word and preaching. In other words, we have to center our program on the word to be shared, making the word the crescendo of our services, the crescendo. And so we have to provide avenues through small groups to discuss Sunday messages so that the word takes center stage. I want to just mention two terms, centripetal and centrifugal. In other words, the word becomes centripetal in that we're moving, it becomes the center, and we move towards the word. And then the centrifugal part now is where, because the word is now center, we've moved to the word. The word is what sends us. So we have gone now with an understanding that we might propagate this word. We have to look at how we can facilitate that. And even after COVID, we might have to think about how we can facilitate more questions and queries about messages that are preached. In other words, it's going to argue for better delivery because the preacher, the teacher, is forced to do better work because he's going to be questioned about what he has said. So better delivery means better digestion. Better delivery, better digestion. A third question that we can ponder is, what do the believers and community miss while the church is now on a break? What do they miss? What do the believers miss? And what does the community miss? Let's deal with the believers. I think the main thing is fellowship. We miss fellowship. And so we've come to recognize that fellowship is important. That time after service when we had the little chit-chat after church is now we're recognizing it as very, very important. We have to try to facilitate that kind of a fellowship even more now and even after, if there's an after COVID. We have to facilitate that. Again, small groups come into play. You're going to be hearing me talk about small group because that seems to be what this COVID has done. It has pushed us into individuality and also pushed us into smaller groups. And we have to learn now how can we facilitate this so that people don't feel left behind. We have to think that through. And another question the question coming out of this is, how has the community viewed the space called church now? Has the community missed the church? Therefore, if they have not missed the church, it could mean that our space called church has just been about us. I think primarily it's about us, but I also think that secondarily, it's about the community. I'm proposing that we almost return to what the temple was like. The Jews didn't just talk about the temple. They spoke about temple life. In other words, the temple was not just about the spirituality. The temple was also about economics. The temple was about in the intellect. The temple was about the physical man. It was about everything, commerce, everything. The temple was a central place. And I'm saying that we need to think through what our space called church is. A lesson coming out of the whole situation now with the Ark in Montego Bay. And we see how this pastor, Kevin Smith, used the space, used it to impact life, maybe he would say, but it became corrupted. I'm not advocating for that, but certainly we can see that a space can be used to impact people's life, not so that they become overly dependent on the space, but so that they appreciate the space and what we're trying to do. A fourth question is this: what is the new thing God is doing, and how might we use it more? And throughout this pandemic, we're seeing that more and more churches are using technology. Before now, we thought that was just a no-no. We can't afford it. We don't have the personnel. But now everybody is using the technology, using the different platforms. How might we use it to develop our people? How might we use it for the glory of God? And so we have to now use our expertise in our churches, our youths who tend to be more savvy with these kind of a thing. We have to think about how we can get them to help us to get this message out, to use it for people development, use it for fellowship, use it for the propagation of the word of God. We have to think that through. Also, a new thing that we see happening, I mean, it's not totally new, but certainly it's happening in greater quantity numbers, is partnership. Whereas we can now stream in speakers from abroad with their wealth of knowledge. In other words, cutting down on the heavy costs, which shouldn't be an issue anymore. So partnership is a huge use. A use of time is a big thing coming out of this. Tapping into other recorded resources to the benefit of the saints. In other words, make them, the believers, more aware of credible speakers and resources they can access. But maybe as leaders, we need to help them to think through, to sift through who are some of these great speakers, preachers, because they're on the technology now. There's no longer is it prudent for us to say, just come to Bible studies and so on. But we have to make use of this because they're already there in that space. Might as well we help them to use that space. Local churches can now join each other in specific Bible studies that meet different persons' needs. So local churches, can join other churches, and that's great. Of course, the technology provides us. What God is doing too is that some of our meetings can be face-to-face and some of our meetings can be online. We don't have to always be physically there. In other words, when we can't physically be there, that was an excuse, and so that person was absent from the meeting. Now, the excuses are limited. You can now be there even if you're not physically there. And I think we have to use that more and more. The blended approach to how we do things. And finally, let us create a culture. We can create a culture of discipleship. A culture of discipleship. Challenging our people. Because out of this coronavirus, we recognize that discipleship is a big thing that we need to maximize on. And I have here that we have to set up for people widely important goals, or WIGs, wildly important goals. In other words, we want to challenge people to of course, get involved in discipleship, and we create a culture. And one way we can create a culture is that whenever we have people in New Life classes and baptismal classes, we have to learn from here on to challenge them and let them know that this is what we are about here at this local church. This is what you're getting involved in. In other words, you're building a culture, you're creating a system, a culture, so that people might recognize what you're doing. Because this is the be-all and the end-all. Discipleship, making disciples. And we have to use small group ministry, use our pulpit to facilitate that now among the more seasoned believers, because we have to get to the place where we recognize that discipleship is the heart of what we do. And also, in our homes, as we are quarantined and isolated in our homes, we have to hold families accountable for their family devotions, for their time together, and so on. And we can. Not that we are forcing people and we are mandating, not such a bad word, but I know with the culture we're living in, the times we're living in, people are afraid of that, But what I'm saying is we can hold families accountable. How are you doing with your family devotions? And because it is from there that their own family members, children and wives, husbands are going to be discipled so that they might be ready for life to come. So these are just some questions that I have been thinking through. There are more, maybe more that you have, but I will be around to help us to think them through and we'll come up with some answers. God bless you. Thank you for listening.